Hey, Grand Adventurers, welcome back. I'm your host, Mark Guido, and we are in historic Fort Casey, right in the middle of Puget Sound on Whidbey Island in Washington State. We're going to explore not only the fort here at Fort Casey, but we're also going to check out Fort Mears, the town of Port Townsend, the entirety of Whidbey Island, and more, all in this episode. So stay tuned. Before we first get to Fort Casey, it's important to first understand its role in defending Puget Sound and the Pacific Northwest in World Wars I and II, along with Fort Worden in Port Townsend and Fort Flagler on Marrowstone Island. Fort Casey was part of the Triangle of Fire, a trio of strategically placed fortifications defending the entrance to the Puget Sound at the turn of the 20th century. Each fort was armed with guns that could reach 7 miles to their target, essentially blockading Puget Sound from enemy ships and protecting such targets as the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard and the cities of Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett. There's a saying in the RV world that it's not about the destination, it's all about the journey. In this case, it's all about both, and our journey to Fort Casey begins in Port Townsend, Washington, on the shores of Puget Sound where it transitions to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. It's known as the City of Dreams because of early speculation that the city would be the largest harbor on the west coast. Its boom period, however, ended in the late 19th century when the Northern Pacific Railroad failed to reach the city. In addition to Port Townsend's waterfront downtown being a tourism destination in its own right, with its Victorian buildings preserved for nearly 100 years, Port Townsend is also home to Fort Worden. Fort Worden Historical State Park occupies 433 acres that originally hosted a United States Army Coast Artillery Corps base. Fort Worden was named after U.S. Navy Rear Admiral John Lorimer Worden, commander of the USS Monitor during the famous Battle of Hampton Roads during the American Civil War. Constructed between 1898 and 1920, Fort Worden was located within sight of a potential, if unlikely, enemy fortification, a British Royal Navy installation on Vancouver Island in Canada. Fort Worden was an active United States Army base from 1902 to 1953. The oldest building on the post is Alexander's Castle, built in 1883 by Reverend John Barrow Alexander, before the creation of Fort Worden. The building was acquired by the government in 1897 when the construction of Fort Worden began. Fort Worden sits on a bluff, anchoring the northwest side of the triangle. None of the three forts ever fired a hostile shot. Fort Worden's defenses quickly became obsolete with advancements in warship technology and development of the airplane. Today, the Sound is protected by aircraft from Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. After World War II, the coast artillery units of Fort Worden were disbanded, and the remaining guns were removed or scrapped. Following a stint as a juvenile detention facility, Fort Worden was transferred to the Washington State Parks and Recreation Commission in 1971, and Fort Worden State Park first opened in 1973. Today, the 2.1 miles of sandy beaches and high bluffs attract residents from around the region to the multi-use recreation facility. The 1982 film An Officer and a Gentleman was shot at Fort Worden. The Point Wilson Light is also active on the grounds of the state park. It was first lit in 1879 and was replaced by the current 51-foot tower in 1914. It is one of the most important navigational aids in the state, overlooking the entrance to Admiralty Inlet, the waterway connecting the Strait of Juan de Fuca and Puget Sound. But our journey to Fort Casey must continue, and there's only one practical way to reach Fort Casey on Whidbey Island from Port Townsend, and that's by sea. Washington State Ferries operates an automobile and passenger ferry, the 273-foot motor vessel Kennewick, between Port Townsend and Fort Casey from early morning until well into the evening. Washington State Ferries is the largest ferry operator in the United States and the second largest vehicular ferry system in the world, although service levels have never fully recovered from the loss of workers who retired, transferred, or were fired during the COVID-19 pandemic, and some routes have yet to resume service. Reservations are highly recommended, especially if you're driving and pulling an oversized vehicle like an RV. Our passage for truck, trailer, driver, and passenger cost approximately $100, but it saved a similar amount in diesel fuel and an untold amount of stress driving through the nearly 4-hour alternative through Seattle. After disembarking the Kennewick, we barely had to turn a corner to reach our campsite at Fort Casey. When we come back following a quick ad break, we'll explore all of Fort Casey State Park, including both the campground and the fortifications, as well as check out Whidbey Island's small towns and surroundings, including Deception Pass, Langley, Coupeville, and Anacortes. So stay tuned. Fort Casey's campground offers 22 dry campsites and 13 partial hookup sites with water and electricity. A central restroom building includes hot showers. There is no dump station, and maximum site length is 40 feet. Our dry campsite costs $32 per night. And once again, Camp Nab found us a cancellation at this otherwise booked up campground. To find your own cancellation in a sold out federal or state campground, visit campnab.com. Fort Casey may be one of the most fascinating places to camp that we visited all year. And that's not just because of the waterfront location. It's because it's situated right on the grounds of Fort Casey Historical State Park. Fort Casey was the second corner of the Triangle of Fire. Construction began in 1897. It was equipped for defense and used as a training facility up to the mid-1940s. The fort houses a pair of fascinating rare 10-inch disappearing guns, the height of technology in the early 1900s. The gun was extended for firing, and its recoil pushed it back into the retracted position, enabling it to hide from direct fire and observation, and allowing soldiers to reload the gun from a protected position. It also made reloading easier, since it lowered the breech to a level just above the loading platform, and shells could be rolled right up to the open breech for loading and ramming. Most of Fort Casey's guns and mortars were removed during World War I, when they were mounted on rail cars to serve as mobile heavy artillery. Some of these weapons were returned to the fort after the war, and were scrapped during World War II. The two 10-inch guns on disappearing carriages from the Watervliet Arsenal near Albany, New York, currently mounted at Fort Casey, were transferred from the Philippines in the 1960s, along with two 3-inch guns. You can explore the fort's batteries to your heart's content. Fort Casey's beautiful 1903 vintage Admiralty Head Lighthouse is a companion to the one we visited earlier, 4 miles across the strait at Fort Worden. It was deactivated in 1922 and was featured on a U.S. postal stamp in 1990. When we come right back following another quick ad break to pay the bills, we'll explore Whidbey Island and visit historic Deception Pass and Anacortes, so stay tuned. Outside of its main commercial center at Oak Harbor, Whidbey Island is largely rural residential and farmland. Numerous charming small towns dot its landscape. Coupeville was laid out in the 1850s by Captain Thomas Coupe and named for him. It was incorporated in 1910. Langley sits near the south end of Whidbey Island, overlooking the Saratoga Passage. It was founded in the 1890s by Jacob Anthes and was named for J.W. Langley of Seattle. It was officially incorporated in 1913 and today is an official Washington State Creative District. Aside from a ferry, there's only one way on or off of Whidbey Island, the bridge at Deception Pass. Explorer George Vancouver gave it the name Deception because it had misled him into thinking Whidbey Island was a peninsula. The bridge was completed in 1935. Prior to that, travelers used an inter-island ferry to commute between Fidalgo and Whidbey Islands. The tidal flow and whirlpools beneath the bridge can reach speeds of about 8 knots and create standing waves with Class 2 and 3 rapid conditions. Ben Nur Island, just east of the bridge, was the focal point of a human smuggling operation for migrant Chinese labor in the 1880s. As long as we're discussing the Puget Sound area, it's worth a quick visit to Anacortes, on the adjacent Fidalgo Island across the Deception Pass Bridge. The town became prominent for its fishing tradition, thriving canning industry, and timber mills. Oil refining remains the area's largest industry today, but the economic base now also includes yacht construction, shipbuilding, and tourism. These Washington State ferries look even more massive in dry dock. So we hope that you've enjoyed checking out Puget Sound's Triangle of Fire with us. If you like this episode, it is extremely important to us that you give us a big thumbs up down below. And while you're down below, that's where you're going to find the comments section, where we love to hear from you after each grand adventure, which we premiere every Wednesday evening. Coming up next week, we're going to be heading to LaConner, Washington, to a marina right on Puget Sound. So if you're not yet a grand adventurer, now is the time for you to go smash that little subscribe button right down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and ring that notification bell to be sure that you never miss a grand adventure. Finally, we would be honored if you shared the channel with your friends, family, and on social media. So until next Wednesday from LaConner, Washington, please remember, life is nothing but a grand adventure. We'll see you then.